Welcome to another podcast of Joe Reagan's Conversation. And today, Joe, I'm at a quandary because let's do a potpourri of topics today. How about that?
Don't we always do? It seems like we always come in this with, oh, we're going to talk about this, and then the countdown comes and you ask me questions that we didn't talk about. And I enjoy it, but it's always a potpourri.
I want to see that you can think on your feet. I mean, come on. If you're going to be a congressman, you have to be able to fend off the questions of the irate constituents, right? So let's
jump in.
Let's jump in and do it.
Hit me.
Okay.
Can I say one thing? Because I thought this was funny this week. I got my hair cut, and
I need one.
You do? Well,
yes.
So the stylist sits me down, and she goes, "Oh." She goes, "When I saw your ticket," she goes, I thought it said Joe Rogan. I was like, "Why is Joe Rogan getting a haircut here?" And I said, it's funny. I actually get that quite a bit, and it's funny. I was like, because I'm the exact opposite of Joe Rogan. And she's like, well, you should really get into podcasting too. Maybe you could just get people all about it. And I was like, I was like, I do podcasting actually. And she's like, well, what do you call it? And I was like, oh, well, it's Joe Reagan's Conversation. She's like, well, you should call it like the Joe Rogan or Joe Reagan Inexperience, and just make an entire podcast about saying the exact opposite of whatever Joe Rogan says. And I was like, we branded this wrong, Gary. It should be the Joe Reagan Inexperience. And we should just do the opposite of what Joe Rogan says. And I'll bet you we could even get probably thousands of listeners just for people thinking they were getting Joe Rogan.
Well, you could have done that, but I just saw a survey where people want now.
Yes.
They want politicians with experience running our government, not these novices that Trump brought in. Well, I mean, that's and you've got experience. I mean, come on, you do.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's different types of experience that we see out there as well. And for both cycles, one of the areas that I've brought forward and said, this is my experience is not necessarily working on Capitol Hill, but my experience is working through the nonprofit space to deliver a lot of these nonprofit programs. So when you look at, so for example, right now, my full-time job is a federal grant. So I'm managing a federal grant. I work with the agency to make sure that everything is up to par, all the hiring pieces, all the bureaucracy, and then when I work with clients, it's the same thing. Going on the other end of that spectrum, navigating the bureaucracy on behalf of these clients to help them make those decisions that are going to support their small business. And as you said, and the question I get asked so often is people will talk about different benefits for small businesses, and they'll say, oh, well, I'm sure this administration is absolutely going to take care of the veterans. And of course, and I always have to be careful, right? Because at this point, if I'm speaking in that capacity, I have to be, apolitical. And I'll say, listen, as a business owner, sometimes the biggest thing that we have to be aware of is to really dig into the issues and understanding what the policies actually stand for. Because, in any administration, they're going to say things, and then what does the policy actually spell out? Both, and this is something that, like you said, where people that have been in the Washington, D.C. circles for a long time are going to say things because they know it's going to appeal to constituents. And then when they actually put stuff into practice, who are the people that are writing those actual rules? And what frustrates me as someone that's been over a decade in the nonprofit space is it's not people like me that are on the ground actually implementing those policies. And when I'm doing my call time in the evenings, when I'm calling and engaging with voters, and people say, well, what are your issues? And I say, hey, got a lot of experience in mental health and veterans affairs and national security, housing, all these things. I said, but really the question you should be asking elected officials, who are you going to call when you have a question about a particular issue? So when we have policy issues that are on the table and we need to be able to inform ourselves, who are the people that you're going to call? And I think this is the frustrating part is, when, the people that Donald Trump has brought into his administration have been, blatantly incompetent. And it is not just about experience. It's the fact that they are inexperienced in working in government and they are inexperienced at actually managing people. And Pete Hegseth is a great example of that. Pete Hegseth I don't think he could lead a Boy Scout troop out of a wet paper bag. Never mind manage the multi-billion-dollar budget that makes up our Department of Defense. And that's where, again, as a nonprofit person, right? And I look at the people that I surround myself with, and there are other nonprofit leaders here in the town that are actually engaged in the work of delivering services to people in our community, whether that's teachers, whether that's veterans affairs, whether it's installation commanders. All of these folks are the folks that they inform a lot of the things that I think about. And I find that when I'm talking to people, I do get that response quite a bit of like, I'd never heard someone approach it that route before. I've never heard someone talk about this before. Like when, earlier or last week, I guess, the formal announcement came down that Space Command is going to move to Alabama. And
right.
Of course, every politician is, oh, well, it's a politically motivated decision, and and then Crank starts back, tries to spin it and say, oh, it's only 1,000 people are going to lose their jobs. Well, and I was probably the only person that I saw out there with a statement that said, well, listen, if you actually go back to the Air Force's review, one of the issues that they brought up was the cost of housing. And that's an area that, and there's two aspects to this, because early on, when I started to look at the Space Command decision, and it goes well beyond that too. There's two factors that we don't talk enough about. One is what's called encroachment. So encroachment on the federal installations. It's kind of funny how they mention it. Every installation has what's called an environmental impact study. And that talks about these encroachment areas. And essentially, you would think that actually has something to do with like, oh, well, stuff happening on the base could impact the environment downstream. And that's not what this is about. It's about what's happening around the installation that can impact its operations. And so, for example, some of the communities up in Palmer Lake, when those were developed, no one made any thought to the fact that there was a shooting range in the Air Force Academy that was shooting directly into those neighborhoods. And so now that shooting range is obviously closed for safety reasons, but now there's no shooting range at the Air Force Academy. If you look down south on 115, the artillery ranges, the impact zones, as we continue to see development happening down on South 115, that's getting pretty close to some of these communities. Now, it's not a danger, right? We're not going to see a missed round lined into a neighborhood. That's not going to happen. But if you're like where I live, which is just off of Gate 2, you're going to hear, you hear the artillery, and it is loud. It'll shake the windows when those 155s are going off. If you're downrange at the other end of that, yeah, you better believe that's going to shake the house, and people are going to complain about it. And so this has a mission impact on those training missions at the Air Force Academy at Carson. And when we get into different spaces, so when we bring it into the Space Command conversation, the reason that Schriever is out there is it kind of needs some standoff space for a number of different reasons. And actually, in my last assignment in the military was actually doing satellite flight operations. So I've got a little bit of knowledge here that goes beyond what we're going to talk about. But this is one of those, hey, I've been there. I kind of know what happens. Give me a little grace because I don't want to talk about it in detail. But Schriever needs that space. And so when we saw things like the Carmen Line annexation was right on the edge of that environmental impact area. And now we see the county commissioners approve a new land sale that is literally right up against the gate of Schriever. And that just on the mission sense, that sort of encroachment on those federal installations creates a problem for those installation commanders to manage the mission sets that are happening there. And especially when we look at how we want to see Space Command grow and expand into new space-based missions, they're going to need that standoff space in order to do what you need to do to operate in a space environment. And then I think what impacts all of us, though, too, is go back to this study around the basing decision of Space Command, whether it should be here or anywhere else. And one of the factors that was brought up was the cost of living in Colorado Springs exceeded what the housing allowance for most service members can afford. So even as we were talking before we went live, even senior officers would have a hard time on their housing allowance finding decent housing in our community. And so the decision that has to be made there is either A, on behalf of DOD, do they raise the housing allowance, which of course costs a lot of money for every soldier that's here or every service member that's here, or as a community, we can be proactive in actually engaging in truly affordable housing. And if you look at what we saw with the Carmen Line annexation, none of those homes would be affordable to an active duty service member. None of them. No. Except for like the most senior officers, and they get on-base housing anyways. So that the housing issue is something that we really, I'd say if any politician is out there talking about the loss of Space Command, then the immediate question is, well, what are we doing to address affordability so that our service members and their families have a quality of life that we've promised them? And that also kind of bleeds into the spouse employment issue as well, which is something that over the past year I've been very involved in working with locally to help sure that when military spouses come here, that they have access to high quality employment, or in my case, oftentimes working with them for self-employment. These are areas that we need to invest in a community if we want to have a chance of maintaining Space Command, which, given the timeline and how it's going to go, we could still hold on to it potentially. But more importantly, how do we retain the other missions that we have, and how do we set the conditions so that we can continue to expand those mission sets? Really comes down to affordability, which, if you're not associated with the military, that is still a good problem for us to be solving, because affordability is impacting every one of us in this community. And I think you said before we went live, again, that this is an issue that our elected officials are not really taken seriously.
You're right, because one of the bones of contention I have with our city council, and I think we can spill it on over to the county commissioners, is they never ask for a business plan on these projects, and they never ask for a marketing plan.
Yep.
Because if they ever saw those two documents, they would probably say, I'm sorry, but we can't afford you.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden it's coming out that, like, the 5,000 houses that they've proposed for just outside the gates there at Cheever is not affordable. Because then the county commissioners could have just squelched it and told the developer, it's nice you bought all that land to develop, but you better put a for sale sign on it, because we're not going to approve your project. Because it is not affordable, it's not what we want, and we don't need more expensive housing in this community at all. But that's been one of my bones of contention.
And tied to that, there's, I think, two other areas that I hear a lot about from voters when I'm out and about. Would be one, also making sure that the infrastructure keeps pace with that. And that's, no, I'm not just talking about, water, sewer, gas, and electricity, which is also a challenge that we're running into, but road infrastructure. How do we reduce traffic? How do we move to, and I asked the city planners this a couple months ago, because they were having conversations around like potholes, and of course everyone's complaining about potholes. I said, all right, well, that's great. Potholes are great. But if you look at where we're at technologically speaking, how are we going to start to make those investments so that we can be a truly, a smart city, and a technologically integrated city? And some of those things are happening, but it's going to require, again, substantial investment. And it's from the efficiency standpoint of how can we make sure that, and actually, I guess one project that the city is looking at doing are some of these smart intersections where, by the way, for those that like to speed down 115 or any major corridor in Colorado Springs, just so you know, those lights are all timed. So if you go over the speed limit, you will hit a red light. If you hit the speed limit, if you say the speed limit, you will hit all the green lights. So please slow down, go the speed limit, and you'll hit the green lights, and we all get there faster. But these smart intersections take it to the next level, where they would actually have some sort of like a sensor that sits in the middle of the intersection, and if it's, you know when you're driving down the road and it's like you can see a car that could clearly make it across, and then nobody should have to stop, and you can see this, but yet then somehow you both end up stopping awkwardly, and it's one of those, it's like, wow, you just wasted both of our time. Well, that's what these smart intersections would do, is it would detect traffic coming from both ways and say, well, if I can hold this green for 10 seconds, that car goes through, and then I can give this car green and nobody stops. So it's kind of cost savings time. And again, for our speeders out there, if you're going over the speed limit, it's going to give you a red light.
Well, I got to give you a chuckle here on this one, because a number of years ago, I asked a gentleman in the road department, when are you going to start implementing or considering smart road technology for all these autonomous vehicles that are supposedly coming down the pike?
Yep.
And instead of saying, no, I don't know, he decided to give me a speech. And he kept talking and talking, and the bottom line is that the city is only to consider smart road technology in the year 2045. Oops. In the meantime, the rest of the world is implementing it. And I just said, you got to be kidding me. You're looking for retirement, aren't you? Because by that time he would have been retired. But that tells you that the city is not forward-looking enough, because when they opened up Nevada a couple of years ago for repaving, I call it painting the streets, they had opened it up for some reason. And I said to another person in the road department, are you going to be laying the infrastructure for smart road technology since you've already got the street opened up? And he gave me a deer in the headlight look.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about, So that's a whole different topic for a whole different thing. We can honestly say, without too much reservation, that Jeff Crank will not help us in these areas. Do your feet fit a limb? Who?
Who's this Crank guy? I haven't seen. I've never seen a guy like that.
Well, he's supposedly wearing the title of congressman, and I just got his email last week, and he's supposedly been home in the district working, and I saw these photo ops that were safe, non-confrontational, no interaction with his constituents at all. And he put this stuff up there, and I'm looking at it, and I says, he's still not doing anything. He thinks he can do a Doug Lamborn and not do anything for the next 18 years. Well, hopefully we can change that.
I would love to see, like, I said this at my launch party the other night. I said, if you see me, grab me and take a photo, because and it's not a vanity thing. It's a contrast thing, because I'm out there a lot, and I have not seen Jeff Crank at anything. And this is part of that grassroots strategy of right, folks that listen to this, folks that see me around town. I'd like to hope that you see me doing actual work around the community.
Yeah.
So grab that photo, help me out, and like I said, tag Crank. Joe's out here. Where's Crank? Because you don't. And I say that, again, talking about in my work capacity, managing, a federal program, I would need him as an ally. I would like to have him as an ally to help forward the program that I have. I don't agree with him on anything, but when it comes to supporting my clients, I need that help, and I'm not getting it. And I know that if you look at other programs, they're not getting it either. And it is. And like when you look at organizations like The Place that provides homeless services to youth, they've had to close part of their programs down because of lack of funding. Salvation Army, Lutheran Family Services, Springs Rescue Mission have all had to cut back on staff because of federal cuts. And they say, and it's funny how, and I feel bad because again, as a nonprofit leader, like I get it. Like you gotta be apolitical.
Right.
But you read through it and they'll say, like, Springs Rescue Mission was like, oh, well, some of these COVID dollars dried up. No, Donald Trump cut money to support our housing programs. And because of that, our homelessness figures will go up next year. And because our economy is in the toilet from these tariffs or taxes, because a tariff is a tax.
Right.
Those things have time. I was having this conversation with someone the other day. They said, oh, well, those homelessness numbers, they're not that high. I said, well, those homeless numbers were taken in January. It takes them months to figure it out. And I was like, keep in mind that if on average an American is supposed to, we're told, keep somewhere between 4 to 6 months of savings, which I know not everyone can do, but when you think about that and say, okay, so Donald Trump came in January.
Right.
The market is just now, the jobless figures are just now starting to go up. They'll continue to go up. If I lose my job today, it might take me 3 to 4 months before I exhaust all my savings. And if I don't have another job, that's when you start to see those homeless figures start to creep up again. And that won't, like I said, we won't have those numbers until the count will be in January. And then we won't have that until almost a year from now before we really understand how this disastrous economic, I use the word policy lightly, will really impact
kind of
the
a
community.
bad spot here in Colorado Springs because we have so much reliance on the federal government. And I think it's basically an oxymoron when we have our politicians say, oh, that federal government, damn the government, they're meddling in regulations and everything else. But we're the first city to belly up to the trough for a handout from the federal government when things go bad, because we have no economic base here other than the military. And unfortunately, the Pollyanna outlook that people have around here regarding our military is pretty Pollyannish, basically, because I've been through a BRAC and I've been through a layoff in the aerospace industry. So, I mean, it isn't fun at all. And this town is not prepared for that. Period. I mean, we have no economic base here that we can fall back on. I mean, you can say the cyber centers and all that other stuff, but come on, guys. They can be gone tomorrow.
Support the broader economy. And that's, again, a frustration that I see a lot about is that the potential exists because when you look at the entrepreneurial ecosystem, we have probably some of the best resources for small business owners in the state. And I would put us in comparison to the nation. And that's not me that's not me being Pollyanna. That is me.
Yeah.
You know, I have traveled this state and engaged with economic development officials in communities across Colorado. And we do have it really good here. But we still don't see, again, that periphery investment. So one of the complaints I get from small business owners is, well, we're not seeing enough foot traffic downtown. Like, we would love to have a new business downtown, but there's not, the foot traffic won't support it, or the commercial real estate costs are too high.
Right.
So again, it's a matter of where can we be making those key investments so that we can support our local small business and not more big box, right? And I think that, you know, when I look at the different parts of the city, I look at obviously downtown, I look at Southeast, and I see areas of the community that have a distinct charm, a distinct flavor to them that is Colorado Springs. And then you go up into sort of like Falcon and Peyton, Northgate, and it's more of this big boxy strip mall type thing that lacks that truly unique flavor that makes us special. I mean, look at Old Town, Old Colorado City, Manitou. What can we be doing in these areas to help strengthen those main streets so that our small business owners do have a place that they can go in and thrive? I mean, LART tax is not a federal issue; it is a local issue. But we have the lowest, it's like one of the lowest LART taxes of the top 100 metropolitan cities in the country.
Right, and they've talked about raising the LART tax, but then it runs into Tabor.
Yeah, there should be ways around that. I've talked to the tourism board about this.
Yeah, and
there should be ways around that because it's the way that LART money is then distributed is different than the way tax revenue is. So it shouldn't be related. I know Tabor comes up into the argument, but I don't believe it's related because of the fact that LART is not a tax on us as citizens. It's the visitors.
Well, yeah, to a point. It's still a tax on the people.
Oh, yeah. And that's not me advocating necessarily for a bigger LART tax. I'm just saying we have the lowest one, and when we get to how do we build out our economy, we've got to be creative in some of those ways to fund those projects and how to support them.
Our LART tax is 2%. I believe Denver's 10%.
And some you see like 18%. I've been in towns that have like 18% tax.
What, Denver?
Not Denver. Denver, I think you're right, is probably 10%.
Yeah, for just the LART tax, it's 2% here.
Yeah.
It's very low. You're correct. But I have to circle back here regarding the Space Command. There's another podcast out there called City Matters where Bill Murray, Ralph Rutan of The Independent and also The Gazette, and Pam Zubek, who is also a reporter for The Gazette and The Independent, were discussing what is happening and what we need to do. And Ralph brought up a very good point, is the city has to put the pressure on Crank to do something. And so at this point in time, we can say that Jeff Crank is not going to do anything to offend our dear leader to keep Space Force here. So I had to throw that out there.
And I think that's where, again, I think the greatest compliment that I got during the first election cycle and the conversations I continue to have with city leaders is that, you know, for many of them, especially on the Republican side, I won't attribute it to any particular member of the city government, but has looked at me and be like, hey, there's a lot of people here that don't like that you're a Democrat, but they know they can work with you. And that's really what we need right now. And I wish there was a better way that I kind of wish that there were more city leaders that had the, I'll say it, courage to come out and be like, hey, we want to support the Democratic candidate because he's actually someone that we can work with. And that's what we need. And if I can pivot that conversation to like national politics, this is an area that I think Democrats need to pivot that strategy to words like progressive and centrist and moderate and center right. And so these terms are losing a lot of their meaning. Or at least it becomes so broad that they no longer reflect anything. So where do you find those actual community leaders, and how do you elevate them to put them in a position where they can advocate for their communities? Because this is the whole purpose of representative government, is that I'm not looking to go to Washington to represent the Democratic Party. I'm going to Washington to represent El Paso County. And I know it's
and the outlying areas that are in the congressional fifth.
well, the congressional fifth now sits all in El Paso County. In fact, El Paso County.
All,
yep.
Whoa.
Yep.
So we got rid of some of the
Eastern Plains section, and then they used to extend into Teller County. And so now it's El Paso County minus like the Eastern Plain portions, past Lake Calhoun.
Well, I think what has to happen with the Democratic Party is they have to get together and bury the words that they keep using: progressive, forward-looking, blah, 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 and go on. Bury those words, get together, get them elected, and then fight it out, what they want to do.
And I would take the next step forward. I mean, if you look at, I was reading something, I actually read a great article today. It was, why does everyone hate the Democrats? And the polling on it was quite clear. People don't hate Democrats. People hate the Democratic leadership.
Right.
That both the party and national leaders are not speaking for average Americans. But on the ground, Democrats have a much higher favorability rating when they're connected to the community, and that's what's lacking is, you know. And I got into it with a fairly major donor the other night because I was kind of pushing back on the party. I said, "This is wrong," and essentially what some of these donors are looking for is they're like, "Hey, well, if you can't put $1 million up for your own campaign, you shouldn't be running." And I was like, "What does that say about our party? If we're supposed to be the working person's party, and you only will accept candidates that can write $1 million checks for themselves?" I was like, "I'm sorry, that's not going to get somebody that represents the interests of the majority of us. You're already saying, well, we just want 1%ers to represent the Democrats and the Republicans."
Well, there was a gentleman who ran for the congressional fifth many years ago, and he basically tried to bankroll it himself, his campaign. Mm-hmm. And of course, the Democratic Party really never got behind him, and he ended up in debt up to his eyeballs, and it took him multiple years to pay off everybody and everything. Yeah. You got to say something is wrong with this picture when that happens.
I agree. So, and that's where people can help. And I'm looking at the clock now and realizing that we've burned through another half hour. I will leave that and say, listen, I am not a rich person, and I have put a lot of money up to support my campaign because I believe strongly in what we can do together. Financial support from folks that have been listening would be fantastic. You can go to reaganforcolorado.com. I know we were talking about how quickly we can get this produced, but if we get this before Saturday the 13th, I'll be down in Widefield for a town hall. And if this comes out before Tuesday the 16th, up at Northgate at the Goat Patch Brewing. And of course, if you follow Reagan for Colorado on any of the social channels, you can see all the upcoming events that we have.
Okay, well, that should do it. Thank you, Joe, for another... We never did hit all the topics. I mean, for potpourri,
we never do. We never do.
I mean, you know, because, folks, this is unrehearsed. We just sit here about 2 minutes before I flip the switch and say, what are we talking about?
What are we talking about today? And then we don't talk about that.
And we never talk about that. Okay, thank you, Joe.
It's called authenticity, Gary. We're authentic here. And this is an authentic conversation.
Let's put it this way. As I was told, it's organic.
Oh, I like that.
We're organic. Okay.
We're the Whole Foods of podcasts.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks, Gary.